Good evening and welcome to New York City Atheists Live on Tape, brought to you by New York City Atheists. I'm your host, Dennis Horvitz, the David Letterman of the Hopelessly Damned. This is the second in a series of shows with representatives of the National Secular Society from London, England, and we are very pleased to welcome Keith Porteous Wood, who is the Executive Director. Thanks for joining us.
Hello there.
You have a couple of really important messages to give to our listeners, and one of which is that the reason that you and last week, of course, I guess, was Terry Sanderson, who was the president of your organization. You're going to be presenting at the Humanist Association in Washington, D.C., but you're also here in regards to the United Nations. You're at the United Nations, is that correct, or you're on your way to the United Nations?
Well, I will be going there in New York to discuss what I found in Geneva, which was the United Nations Human Rights Council.
Human Rights Council. And I understand that you found discovered some very uncomfortable information.
Yes,
facts.
Yes, indeed I did. I went to the United Nations Human Rights Council, which is in Geneva, Switzerland, to be an international representative for IHU, that's the International Humanist and Ethical Union, which is, as most of your viewers will know, the international umbrella organization for humanist and secularist organizations. And what I found there profoundly disturbed me. I went with a great deal of enthusiasm and optimism. Like my president, we both feel that human rights are absolutely central to a non-religious way of continuing, as both from a state position and a legal position. And I was involved in a debate some time ago with the top people in the Church of England, that's the established Church of England, and we were having a battle royal over this establishment which we oppose and have been for the whole 140-year history of the National Secular Society. And we had this battle in front of academics and senior parliamentarians, and even a representative of the Prime Minister, and we produced a big paper for this, and at the end of it there was a big debate, and really the bottom line of the debate was that the Church of England was saying, even if there's only one person in the country left supporting us, eventually that I think is going to happen, that even with one person it still justified the Church of England, because they maintained that it was not possible to have a state without some kind of moral rudder, which they maintained had to be a religious one. And my answer to that question was, there's a very easy answer to that, an alternative and a much better one, which is democracy and human rights. So I feel passionately about human rights. And it was in that way, that in mind, that I went with great optimism to Geneva. But what I found when I got there was really quite shocking. First of all, I found that non-governmental organizations, NGOs, actually didn't get much chance to say what they wanted to say. Because we had plenty of things that we wanted to say and didn't get much chance, just a few minutes here and a few minutes there, and after a lot of delay. But much more important than that was that the Western nations really had so little to say, but that the Islamic nations and a few other people in a voting bloc they seem to have established, including Cuba and Russia, were taking what I would not say were human rights compliant points at all. They seem to be obstructive. They seem to be going for defamation of religion legislation, which seem to be very much anti-freedom of expression.
So, how can you account for this? I mean, to what do you attribute to this? This seems to be, to me, to be a lapse. In other words, maybe I'm a naive American, but it seems that Europe has been moving progressively for the last 100 years anyway. You know, certainly for the last 50, and then to all of a sudden get this European Union thing happening, and this Human Rights Council in Geneva, and to have so few people interested in the very thing that it's supposed to accomplish.
Well, I think it's more complex than that, and I don't think it's not a European problem. It's a kind of Western problem.
Good point. Yes.
And one of the things I'm going to say in Washington is that it's actually a U.S. problem as well, and I think the U.S. engagement with the United Nations and promoting human rights is something that I'm extraordinarily disappointed with. And it's not long since I met Mark Malloch Brown, Lord Malloch Brown, as he now is, who's now a Foreign Office Minister in the United Kingdom government, but was until not so long ago the Deputy Secretary General at the United Nations. And one of the things he was incredibly unpopular for doing, but I think had immense courage to do, was actually to say to the United States, you know, this isn't an exact quote, but you know, until you can engage again with human rights and the United Nations in the way that, say, the Roosevelts and Kennedys had the foresight and the global vision to do, then we're forever going to be having these kind of problems. We will never get progress. We will never get the kind of strength from the liberal or free countries fully supporting human rights that we need to have.
What areas, because we were chatting a bit before the show, what areas do you think that this Human Rights Council in Geneva, can you be more specific into what areas you think that it's failed to accomplish?
Absolutely. Well, if I had to say one, it would be freedom of expression, and I'd like to go into that into some detail.
Sure.
But we will also remember, shall we, that there are a handful of states which retain the capital offence for blasphemy, a handful of states that retain capital offence for homosexual acts.
Yes.
And whatever people think about the death penalty, I think that there can't be many of your viewers who would support it for either of those two reasons. And there is virtually nothing said at the United Nations Human Rights Council about these countries that have such formal transgressions like that. And as it happens, they are all countries with very large Islamic influence.
Right.
And maybe that's the reason that it's considered bad taste to even mention it. But those are the kind of big issues. But the ones, static as far as I can see, that there just doesn't seem to be any move positively in those areas. But where things are actively getting worse it is in expression, freedom of expression, and that's what I'm currently fighting at the moment and trying to raise awareness of, as well as awareness of the malaise in the UNHRC, the United Nations Human Rights Council, as a whole. And as far as the freedom of expression is concerned, over the last few years, the Human Rights Council and indeed, in fact, the General Assembly have been passing motions about what they call defamation of religion, and they want laws, effectively international laws, against this defamation of religion. Now, there are a whole series of arguments against that on freedom of expression grounds, but I would like just to remind your viewers of some of the terrible things that are happening over blasphemy, and this will be a kind of super blasphemy law. In Pakistan, we had experience of someone who was eventually given asylum in Europe, but they were accused of blasphemy by somebody who wasn't there when they were said to have blasphemed, and they denied it anyway. This man, who was a doctor, was banged into prison, and the authorities, the lawyers were unhappy to actually work on his case. He couldn't get any kind of legal representation to defend himself, and apparently he had to defend himself, or he was in danger of having to do so. We eventually got Amnesty International working on the case, and he eventually got acquitted. But I don't think without international pressure that would happen, and that's with and very often people who get into that situation get murdered in prison.
Right.
And everybody just turns the other cheek. They don't care about it at all.
Right.
So that's just blasphemy. If we actually have an undefined defamation of religion law, that will be sort of blasphemy times 10, and I think it's going to support the extremists against the moderates, and it's going to shield extreme religious activity from any kind of criticism.
Right, and under those terms, almost anything could be called religious expression.
Absolutely.
And you could use that for well. Of course, I'm not so naive as to assume that religion wouldn't be used for political purposes. But you know, anybody that says something that you don't like politically could be persecuted for offenses against religion. It could be. There's no end to it.
Absolutely.
It's a lack of restraint.
So we're making representations both to the United Nations Secretary General and also to the High Commission on Human Rights on those issues. But a similar issue has arisen recently, where the same bloc of nations have actually modified the terms of reference of the Special Rapporteur on freedom of expression to report on abuses of freedom of expression, which are, it seems to really to be saying we don't want you to do your job at all, and anything that's talking about religion is an abuse of freedom of expression. Always beware of people who say, I'm entirely in favour of freedom of expression as long as it's used responsibly. Right. That's no freedom at all.
Because it's unpopular.
It's the unpopular thing that is where it's a speech that it's relevant and most important to be protected.
Right. You also, when we were before the show, we were also saying that you wanted to that you're an accountant. Is that?
Actually, yes. Well, I don't know when one starts becoming an accountant. I took over as the director of the National Secular Society when I was around 50. It was my second career. I had quite a high-flying career in the city in London as a finance director. And if I thought I worked hard then, and I did, I actually work much harder now. And
the stakes seem to be much higher too.
Well, the society's grown considerably in the 10 years that I've been there, and it's been great. It's been a great challenge to do that, and particularly it's interesting how in that 10 years people didn't originally know what secularism was, and it wasn't much of an issue. Now partly, I have to say, because of a much more aggression, both within the Christian community and also the minority faith community, particularly Muslims, that people have become much more conscious of religious power and religious misuse of power and of the separation of religion and politics issues.
Yes. Well, the reason I mention that you bring up your being an accountant is because I understand that you have some very shocking statistics to give us regarding the difference between the UK and their approach to religion and the US.
Absolutely, I think it might surprise some of your viewers about just how little religion there is in the United Kingdom and how desperately the government is trying to play that down. They had a census in 2001 that was worded in such a way and positioned in such a way in the census that it got 72% of people saying that they were Christian. And on the face of it, that was very high, and indeed it was. But the reality is very different. I think if you instead ask the question, do you belong to which religion do you belong to? The number comes down very much round to say 50% or something like that. And in fact, a lot of people, roughly half of the population, have said they don't belong to any religion. The proportion of people that go to church on an average Sunday is 1 in 14. And church attendance has been in decline for 60 or 70 years. And to give you an idea of the scale of that decline, it's something like 25% in reduction in the last 20 years or so. And that 1 in 14 figure that I gave you of the people currently going to church, the Christians' own estimate of that number in 2040 is 1 in 50. 2% of people going to church on an average Sunday. So so what's so strange about what's happening now is that in my 10 years in this job, which incidentally is the best job in the country, and I've got it, and no, you can't have it. And I've been privileged.
So don't send us your resumes because...
That's right. I'm privileged to have done it, and it's been a very challenging job, but a very exciting one. What's happened in that time is that the degree of religious influence in government has gone up and up and up, and we find that obviously very worrying. And
we're not very thrilled about it either.
That's right. And what's extraordinary, I've noticed in the last 4 or 5 years, is that the tactics that have been used by particularly Christians have become less and less reasonable or decent, or in fact honest. And we've actually found quite deliberate lies being pushed in debates and that kind of thing. I mean, in Parliament and whole page, we had a whole page advert in a newspaper scaremongering about gay equality a year ago, and I was so angry about it I actually put a complaint into the Advertising Standards Authority because they'd made 4 statements of fact, all of which were wrong, and everybody would have known they were wrong who knew anything about it, and lawyers were amongst those who placed the action, and we won.
Excellent. Congratulations. That's wonderful. That's I think, I don't know, we're gaining some ground, but I don't...
Not enough.
Not enough. We have a long way to go, but I'm absolutely shocked that people who are washed in the blood of Jesus would be so deceitful and stretch the truth. And I guess I'm just a naive American. But what you said you found some contrasts though between the British point of view, the British religiosity, and in the United States.
Well, I think that I particularly was struck by going to the American Atheist Conference, the annual conference, which a few years ago I was guest of honor at, and
that was in Boston.
It was in Boston, that's right. And what's absolutely astonished me about that was it was almost like a gay rights meeting 30 or 40 years ago. There were people there saying, by the way, my aunt doesn't know that I'm here, and I haven't told my sister-in-law, and do you think I should? And this kind of thing. And to a European,
yes,
that sounds mind-blowing.
Yes, I can see it would. It still persists to some degree even today, but fortunately there's less of it. It's just not happening as fast as we would like. My family know that I'm an atheist. They know that I'm active. Of course, when you have a television show, it's hard to keep it a secret. You know, you can't hide your light under a bushel or keep it quiet. But you know, I have a regular job. They know that
But even speaking in those terms, I mean, to a European, that is shocking.
Right,
I mean, the default
position,
the default position, certainly in the United Kingdom, is either that you're not religious at all, or if you are, you keep it, you make it. It's a very private matter.
I've heard that from several sources. That's exactly the attitude that you have. And whereas here, the contrast here is the default position is that you do have a religion.
But it's changing in a sense, in the opposite way, in one respect, in that with Muslims becoming very much more vocal, and they really are in London.
Not so much here.
No, I've noticed that. I've noticed that. But we are. But I mean, there's an awful lot more veiled people in several European cities than there are here. There's a much stronger Muslim communities, and I think sometimes then here they tend to be more professional class. I understand a lot of them.
Oh, sure.
But that isn't the case. They come. A lot of them in the United Kingdom come from farming stock in farming communities in Pakistan, and they're very much more, shall we say, orthodox in their views, and I think that there is a lot more pressure. They're visible, and I think people feel that the Muslim people are quite actually articulate, and I think it's given the Christians the idea that they can actually start to do these things too now, and so it's reinvigorated them in a strange way.
Yeah, I don't have any sense that that's happening here, but I know that I know that because I've talked to people. I've met people from England through the internet, and they expressed exactly what you've said, that being an atheist should be an issue at all is completely foreign to them. They just can't even grasp that you have to have an organization, American Atheists or the New York City Atheists. American Atheists and New York City Atheists it's unfortunate that we're a civil rights group because we have to be, and also to educate people about atheism and the rights of atheists. But we don't have that kind of the problem with Muslims because, like you say, most of them, I think a huge number of them are professional people, and probably, I don't know, maybe they have a state.
But we actually have a major problem with forced marriages, female genital mutilation, because although this is against the law, we have a pitifully low level of prosecutions, and it's because, to a degree, that the authorities are, in inverted commas, culturally sensitive.
Yes.
and are frightened to touch it, and they're betraying a lot of the people in these communities. And one of the problems is that the government thinks that everybody in these communities are of the faith, but in fact many of them aren't, or are very semi-detached and wouldn't if they didn't have to be, and the religion is actually an oppression for them.
Right.
I was just speaking to a government minister before I flew over to the States to actually say, please try and reach these hard to contact people, hard to reach people within these communities, and give them some help. They really need it.
I understand it has been a very serious problem in the Netherlands. I don't know if you've read the book by Ian Hirsi, The Infidels. Basically, the Dutch police were just extremely reluctant to go and enforce Dutch law in Muslim communities. In any case, we're running out of time actually, but it goes too fast as usual. Anything else you'd like to say to our viewers in the last?
Well, I'd just like to say that we really want to support you from Europe, and we try to support you in any way we can. But we in your very noble fight in American Atheists. But I think above all, I'd like you to encourage your government to become much more involved with the United Nations, with the United Nations Human Rights Council, and promoting human rights.
Unfortunately, our president's one major accomplishment will be to turn July 4th into a British national holiday. Thank you very much for coming.
It's a pleasure.
Great. Thank you. You've been watching New York City Atheists live on tape, brought to you by New York City Atheists. I have been your host, Dennis Horvitz. Please join us again next week. Thank you. Excellent.